Welcome, learners. Welcome, learners. Today we're going to be talking about psychoanalysis. Now, psychoanalysis is a very, very important area both in literary criticism as well as in psychology. So, I will begin by quoting from the Encyclopedia Britannica, which states that Freud's creation of psychoanalysis, and this is a quote, was at once a theory of the human psyche, a theory for the relief of its ills, and an optic for the interpretation of culture and society. Despite repeated criticisms, attempted refutations, and qualifications of Freud's work, its spell remained powerful well after his death and in fields far removed from psychology as it is narrowly defined. So it is but obvious that we are going to be talking a lot about Sigmund Freud because he was, in a sense, the one who put psychoanalysis on the literary critical map as well as in the field of psychology. Now, psychoanalysis, the word is made up of two components: psyche, which means soul, and analysis, which means to investigate. The word obviously has Greek origins, and the term was developed in the 1940s by Sigmund Freud. Now, psychoanalysis as a discipline was established in the early 1890s by Austrian neurologist Sigmund Freud, and it is a clinical method for evaluating and treating pathologies in the psyche. How? Through dialogue between a patient and a psychoanalyst. Now, Freud's work stems partly from the clinical work of Joseph Breuer and other people who worked in the same field. Psychoanalysis was later developed in many different directions, mostly by students of Freud, such as Alfred Adler and his collaborator Carl Gustav Jung, as well as by neo-Freudian thinkers such as Erich Fromm, Karen Horney, and Harry Stack Sullivan. Now, Sigmund Freud, as you know, was born in 1856 in Vienna, Austria, and he spent most of his childhood as well as his adult life in Vienna. He entered medical school and trained to become a neurologist. So he was a doctor, earning a medical degree in 1881. Soon after his graduation, he set up a private practice and began treating patients with psychological disorders or illnesses. But his attention was largely captured by a colleague's intriguing experience with a patient. Now, the colleague that is being referred to was Dr. Joseph Breuer, and his patient was the famous Anna O, whom children who have studied psychology would be very, very familiar with. Now, Anna O suffered from physical symptoms which had no apparent physical cause. Anna O, of course, her pseudonym is Anna O is a pseudonym. Her real name was Bertha Pappenheim, and she lived between 1859 and 1936. She was a patient of the physician Joseph Breuer, and her case was described in the book that Breuer wrote with Sigmund Freud called Studies on Hysteria. Now, Bertha Pappenheim, or Anna O as she was called, she initially sought Breuer's help with a series of symptoms that included visual disturbances. Sometimes she couldn't see things, sometimes she saw things that were not really there. Hallucinations. She suffered from partial paralysis. She even had speech problems. So she went to Joseph Breuer to consult with him with regards to these issues that she was facing. Now, Breuer, he diagnosed the young woman with hysteria and later discussed her case with Sigmund Freud, who then went on to develop his own ideas of what lay at the very root of Anna O's condition. Her treatment played an important part in the establishment and development of psychoanalysis. Now, Dr. Breuer found that her symptoms abated when he helped her recover memories of traumatic experiences that she had repressed or hidden from her conscious mind. So this case obviously sparked Freud's interest in the unconscious mind and spurred the development of some of his most influential ideas. Now, how exactly would we define psychoanalysis? Psychoanalysis is a type of therapy that aims to release pent up or repressed emotions and memories in or to lead the client or the subject or the patient to catharsis or healing. In other words, the goal of psychoanalysis is to bring what exists in the unconscious mind to the subconscious level and finally up to the conscious level or the consciousness. Now, what were the basic tenets of psychoanalysis? A person's development is determined by often forgotten events in early childhood rather than by inherited traits alone. The way you are, the way you behave, all right, was determined largely also by what you could have experienced in early childhood. Now, this is what Freud had concluded. The second thing is human behavior and cognition or understanding are largely determined by instinctual drives, right? You trust, that's why we have the saying, trust your instincts, that are rooted in the unconscious. Attempts to bring such drives into awareness triggers resistance in the form of defense mechanisms and particularly repression. Conflicts between the conscious and the unconscious material can result in mental disturbances such as neurosis, neurotic behavior, neurotic traits, anxiety, and depression. Now, unconscious material can be found in dreams and unintentional acts, like certain mannerisms. We might display certain mannerisms, or it could be revealed in the sense of slips of tongue. Liberation from the effects of the unconscious is achieved by bringing this material into the conscious mind through therapeutic intervention, right? You go for therapy. Now, the centerpiece of the psychoanalytical process is the transference. Now, what is transference? Whereby patients relive their infantile conflicts by projecting onto the analyst, the psychoanalyst, feelings of love, dependence, and anger. Now, coming to the history part of psychoanalysis and how it developed and how it moved, Freud first used the term psychoanalysis in 1896. In November 1899, he wrote The Interpretation of Dreams, which Freud thought of as his most seminal and significant work. Now, in the early 1890s, the idea of psychoanalysis first began to receive attention under Sigmund Freud, who kind of formulated his own theory of psychoanalysis in Vienna in the 1890s. He, of course, like we mentioned earlier, was a neurologist who was trying to find an effective treatment for patients with neurotic or hysterical symptoms. Now, if you remember earlier, if anybody displayed a sudden outburst of anger, this is at least 30, 40 years ago, or if somebody started crying all of a sudden or was excessively happy and joyous all of a sudden, that was usually termed as hysteria. And hysteria was supposed to be a condition that affected only women and young girls. It was never a male's disease. So Freud at that point of time was trying to look for treatment to treat patients who were supposed to be neurotic or who had hysterical symptoms. Freud realized that there were these mental processes that were not conscious. While he was employed as a neurological consultant at a children's hospital, and there he noticed that many aphasic children had no apparent organic cause for their symptoms. Just as we were discussing earlier in the case of Anna O, she experienced various types of physical symptoms, symptoms where she had partial paralysis, symptoms where she had speech impairment, symptoms where she had visual distortions and disturbances, but there was no physical, concrete reason or cause for her illness. So Freud was trying to do something similar because he was working as a consultant at a children's hospital where he noticed that many children had no apparent organic cause for an illness, but they had these symptoms. So he even went on to write a monograph about this subject. Now, in 1885, Freud obtained a study grant to study with Jean-Martin Charcot, a famed neurologist in Paris. And Freud followed the clinical presentations of Charcot, particularly in the area of hysteria, because he was looking at hysteria and neurosis. paralysis, and the anesthesias. So now Charcot had introduced hypnotism as an experimental research tool and developed the photographic representation of clinical symptoms by using hypnotism. So for Freud's very first theory to explain hysterical symptoms was presented in a work called Studies on Hysteria, which was published in 1895. And it was co-authored with his mentor, the distinguished physician Joseph Breuer. And this is generally seen as the birth of psychoanalysis. And like we mentioned again earlier, this work was largely a study of Anna O's condition. Now, in 1896, Freud also published another important work, which was his seduction theory. And he claimed to have uncovered repressed memories of incidents of sexual abuse from all his current patients, from which he proposed that the preconditions for hysterical symptoms are sexual excitations in infancy. But this was in 1896. By 1898, he had privately discussed and acknowledged to his friend and colleague William Fless that he no longer believed in this theory, though he did not make it public until much later in 1906. Now, in 1896, he had reported that his patients had no feeling of remembering the infantile sexual scenes and assured him emphatically of their unbelief. In large accounts, he claimed that they told him that they had been sexually abused in infancy. Now, this became the received historical account until challenged by several Freud scholars in the latter part of the 20th century, who argued that he has imposed his own preconceived notions on his patients, because he primarily believed that if a child experienced some sort of sexual abuse in its infancy, it would result in a certain kind of behavior, in a certain kind of personality development in adulthood. However, building on his claims that the patients reported infantile sexual abuse experiences, Freud subsequently contended that his clinical findings in the mid-1890s provided evidence of the occurrence of unconscious fantasies, supposedly to cover up memories of infantile masturbation. By 1899, Freud also had theorized that dreams had symbolic significance, that dreams were important, and generally were specific to the person who experienced them or to the dreamer. Now, Freud formulated his second psychological theory, which hypothesizes that the unconscious has or is a primary process, a very, very important primary process, which consists of symbolic and condensed thoughts. And then you have a secondary process, which is of logical and conscious thoughts. So he is trying to say that there are two types of processes taking place. The primary one, which is the unconscious, so it consists of symbolic and condensed thoughts. And the second process, the secondary process, is of logical and conscious thoughts. Now, this theory was published in his 1899 book, The Interpretation of Dreams. See, in this theory, which was later supplanted by structural theory, what Freud is trying to do or say is that unacceptable sexual wishes were repressed into the system unconscious. Okay, unconscious because society condemns certain types of acts. It condemns premarital sexual activity, and this kind of a repression creates anxiety. Now, this theory, of course, has fallen out of use and is no longer popular in North America, but there are strains of it still being looked at, still being worked upon in North America. Between the 1900s and 1940s, Freud published 3 essays on the theory of sexuality, in which he laid out his discovery of the psychosexual phases, but we will come to that shortly. Now, if you look at your screen, you will see the picture of an iceberg, right? This was his initial thoughts on what exactly it is that is the conscious, the preconscious, and the subconscious. Now, just as you know that what you see, or what is normally called or not normally said to be the tip of the iceberg, right? The portion that is above the water, that is only 1/10 of what the iceberg, the size of and the magnitude of the iceberg is. So, what the analogy being drawn here, what Freud is trying to say, is that your conscious state is only the tip, is just the surface that you see. What lies inside is your preconscious state and your subconscious state. So now he talks about the conscious, where he says this is where our current thoughts, our feelings, and our focus live. The preconscious is the home of everything we can recall or retrieve from our memory. And at the deepest levels of our minds resides a repository of the processes that drive our behavior, including primitive and instinctual desires. Now, later, of course, Freud posited a more structured model of the mind, one that could coexist with his original ideas about consciousness and unconsciousness. Now, then he also has, there are certain terms that most of you would have heard, even if you're not very sure what it means, right? With Freud, the terms are id, ego, and superego. So, what exactly is the id? The id is the unconscious level, the instinct to survive, or what is known as eros, as opposed to the instinct to destroy, which is the thanatos. Now, many of you would have watched the were movies. What are those movies called? Very, very popular movies which had Thanos as the character, which is basically the instinct to destroy. Now, the id operates at an unconscious level, okay, and it focuses especially or solely on instinctual drives and desires. And two biological instincts make up the id, according to Freud, like we mentioned earlier: eros, or the instinct to survive that drives us to engage in life-sustaining activities, and thanatos, or the death instinct that drives destructive, aggressive, and violent behavior. Now, the next thing is the ego, the second aspect of it. So, ego, it develops in infancy, right? But it keeps the id in check. The ego acts as both a conduit for and a check on the id. It works to meet the id's needs in a very socially acceptable and appropriate manner. It is the most tied to reality, and the id begins to develop when a child is in his or her infancy. Now, the superego is where morality resides. It encourages a sense of social responsibility. The superego is the portion of the mind in which morality and higher principles reside, which encourages us to act in socially and morally acceptable and appropriate ways. Now we come to the other portion of psychoanalysis, which is the defense mechanism. Now we know what is the conscious, the subconscious, and the unconscious state of the mind. We know that we have an id, there is an ego, and a superego at play, right? Now we are looking at how do we react to certain things. So therein comes the concept of the defense mechanisms. Now Freud believed that three parts of the mind are in constant conflict, right, which is the conscience, the unconscious, and the subconscious. They're in constant conflict because each part has a different primary goal. So when each part of your mind has a different goal to attain, it is very natural and but obvious that the three parts will be in conflict. So sometimes when the conflict becomes too much for a person to handle, his or her ego may engage in one or many defense mechanisms, basically to protect the individual. So the first defense mechanism is denial. The ego blocks upsetting or overwhelming experiences from awareness, causing the individual to refuse to acknowledge or believe what is happening. The second thing is repression. The ego pushes, disturbing or threatening thoughts out of our consciousness. The third is repression. The third is projection. The ego attempts to solve discomfort by attributing our unacceptable thoughts, feelings, and motives to somebody else. So we at once distance ourselves. It's not me, it's somebody else. Then displacement. The individual satisfies an impulse by acting on a substitute object or person in a socially unacceptable manner. Like, for instance, your boss was angry at you. You did something which kind of maybe messed up the bottom line or the target line or whatever. So your boss is rude to you. He or she is quite nasty to you, says many things that hurt you and upset you. But there is nothing you can do to your boss. So what do? That anger that you felt towards your boss, it is taken out somewhere else. Most probably in the domestic space, on your wife, on your spouse, or on your child. So that is what is called displacement. Then we come to regression. Now, regression is a defense mechanism whereby the person who's experiencing this situation moves backwards in development in order to cope with stress. So you're very stressed, right? So the example is you're very stressed, so you have an overwhelmed and stressed out adult behaving or acting like a child. Then sublimation. Now, sublimation is quite similar to displacement, and this defense mechanism involves satisfying an insult by acting on a substitute, but in a socially acceptable manner. So what do? You channel energy into work or a constructive hobby. Because you are upset about something, you're anxious about something, it is a very overwhelming feeling, but you do not behave in a socially unacceptable manner. Instead, you divert it into your work. So you focus on your work, or you get into some sort of a creative or a constructive hobby, and you pour out all that anger or the frustration that you were feeling into it. So these are all various kinds of defense mechanisms that we as individuals use to cope with certain situations in life. Now, Freud also talked about the 5 psychosexual stages of development. And this is something that is, again, closely associated with Freud. And he proposed that children go through 5 very, very distinct stages in their development. And each stage was focused on a particular source of pleasure. Now, if you could look at the screen and look at the 5 different stages, you will realize the first stage. Now, we are talking about a newborn from the time a child is born, all right? A newborn baby into infancy. The first stage is the oral stage. The child seeks pleasure from the mouth. So, example, you have a child sucking their thumb, or a pacifier, or a bottle of milk, or nursing. The second stage is the anal stage. The child seeks pleasure from the anus. So how do you do it? Example, you either withhold or you expel fecal matter. The third stage is the phallic stage. The child seeks pleasure from the penis or the clitoris. So the example that you have is of infant masturbation. The fourth stage is the latent stage, where the child has little or no sexual motivation at all. Now, the fifth stage is the genital stage, where the child seeks pleasure from the penis or the vagina, which is basically, an example is, of course, sexual intercourse. Now, Freud hypothesized that an individual must successfully go through and complete each stage to become a psychologically healthy adult with a fully formed ego and superego. Otherwise, what he said was that individuals may become stuck or fixated. Now, fixated is another term. And you are stuck in a particular stage which could cause emotional and behavioral problems in your adult life or in adulthood. Another very, very well-known concept with Freud was his belief in the significance of dreams, which we mentioned briefly earlier. In his book published in 1900, right, called The Interpretation of Dreams, Freud outlined his hypothesis that the primary purpose of dreams was to provide individuals with wish fulfillment, allowing them to work through some of their repressed issues in a situation which was free from consciousness and the constraints of reality. Now, he believed that analyzing one's dreams can give valuable insight into the person or into our own unconscious mind. In his interpretation of dreams, he also distinguished between the manifest content or the actual dream and the latent content, which is the true or the hidden meaning behind the dream. Now, the purpose of dreams was to translate forbidden wishes, taboo desires, into a very non threatening form through condensation, which basically means the joining of two or more ideas, through displacement, which is the transformation of the person or some or object we are concerned about into something or someone else, and secondary elaboration, the unconscious process of turning the wish fulfillment images or events into a logical narrative. Now, Freud's ideas and dreams were game changing. Before Freud, dreams were considered insignificant and insensible ramblings of the mind at rest. His book provoked a new level of interest in dreams, and interest that continues to this day. So after Freud, you had his student Carl Jung, who continued his works in an altered form. Now, Carl Jung was born in 1875, died in 1961. His particular type of psychology is known as analytical psychology, and his work formed the basis for most modern psychological theories and concepts. Now, earlier, Freud and Jung, both of them, shared an interest in the unconscious and worked together in their early days, but they had a few disagreements, key disagreements, and that kind of ended their partnership. And Jung began to devote his attention fully to his new psychoanalytical theory. Now, the main difference between Freudian psychology and Jungian or analytical psychology are related to three things. One was the nature and function of the libido. Jung saw libido as a general source of psychic energy that could motivate a wide range of human behaviors, whether it was sexual behavior, whether it was spiritual behavior, whether it was creative behavior, while Freud saw it as psychic energy that drives only sexual gratification. So that was the very first point of contention between Jung and Freud. The second was the nature of the unconscious. Now, Freud viewed the unconscious as a storehouse which stored an individual's socially unacceptable, repressed desires. Jung believed it was more of a storehouse for the individual's repressed memories, or what he called the collective or transpersonal unconscious, a level of unconscious that was shared, right, with other human beings, that is made up of latent memories from our ancestors, or what is often called collective memory. Now, the third point of contention between Freud and his student Jung was the cause of behavior. Freud saw behavior as being caused solely by past experiences, and most of that was, something that occurred or took place in one's childhood. Whereas Jung believed that our future aspirations, what we would like to be, where we would like to be, that has a significant impact on the way we behave today. Thereafter, we had Jacques Lacan, another very, very influential person in the field of psychoanalysis. His particular brand is known as Lacanian psychoanalysis. Lacan was born in 1901 and he died in 1981. Now, in the late 1900s, the French psychologist Lacan called for a return to Freud's work, but with a different focus, a renewed focus on the unconscious and a great deal of attention to the use of language. Now, Lacan drew heavily on his knowledge of linguistics and believed that language was a much more important piece of the development puzzle than Freud assumed. And there were three key concepts of Lacan's psychoanalysis that sets it apart from Freud's talk therapy, which is the real, the symbolic, and the mirror stage. Now, in the real, Freud saw the symbolic as being indicative of a person's unconscious mind, particularly in dreams. Lacan believed that the real is the most basic, is the foundation of the human mind. According to Lacan, we exist in the real and experience anxiety because we cannot control it. Unlike the symbolic, which Freud proposed could be accessed through psychoanalysis, the real cannot be accessed. Once we learn and understand language, we are severely and completely removed from the real. So he described it as a state of nature in which there exists nothing but a need for food, sex, safety. We will wind up now because we need a short break here, and we will continue with Freud's symbolic order and the mirror stage in the next half of the talk. Thank you. We welcome you to join the bouquet of programs offered by the School of Humanities, the Indira Gandhi National Open University, New Delhi. The Indira Gandhi National Open University, New Delhi is a mega university today. It was created by an Act of Parliament in 1985. It is the world's largest university with an enrollment of about 3.5 million current students and 3.2 million alumni. IGNOU has also been accorded the highest grade of academic excellence, A++, by the National Assessment and Accreditation Council, or the NAC. Now, during your time at IGNOU as a learner, we will help you complete your program of study with world-class printed materials, audio and video programs. We have more than 35,000 academic counselors who will guide you till you complete your program of study. We also provide live interaction with your teachers at the headquarters via teleconferencing mode, and live interactive radio counseling besides this, supported by regular TV and radio broadcasts. The School of Humanities was created in 1988, and we welcome you warmly to join any of our programs of study. IGNOU degrees, diplomas and certificates are recognized not only in the country but are also very well received across the globe. We look forward to your journey with us, and we welcome you once again. The School of Humanities of the Indira Gandhi National Open University offers more than 26 ODL programs, which is open and distance learning programs, and now more than 10 online programs. A very interesting feature that we have, a very interesting program that we have on offer right now is the BA English Honours. Now, in this particular program, what we've done is we've taken a large number of courses from English, which means is English as a discipline. And then we have also put in other interdisciplinary and skill-based elective courses. So all of them combine to give you the BA English Honours, which gives students the exposure to subjects which is related to English literature as well as other disciplines, and it will introduce you to various aspects of literature through the core, the discipline centric, the ability, as well as the skill enhancement and generic courses. Now, it also exposes learners to the importance of interdisciplinary study, which is in keeping with the National Education Policy 2020. And how do we do this? Because we enable learners to opt for courses which are outside their discipline, not just from English. Now, the eligibility for this program, the BA English Honours, is you need to have a 10+2 grade. And for those students who do not have 5 core subjects, right? Especially if they have a SUPW course as the 5th subject, they need to pursue one senior. Welcome back. We were talking about Lacan's 3 stages, and we had just kind of finished talking about what was the real. Now, the next thing that we will be looking at is the symbolic order. So what exactly was the symbolic order? Lacan's symbolic order is one of the 3 orders that concepts, ideas, thoughts, and feelings can be placed into. That is the area where all these things can be placed. Our desires and our emotions live in the symbolic order, And this is where they are interpreted. If possible, concepts like death and absence may also be placed or integrated into the symbolic order, because we have at least some understanding of them. But we may not be able to fully comprehend it and interpret it, but we do have a basic understanding of an absence or a death. Now, once we learn a language, we move from the real to the symbolic order, and we are not able to move back to the real. So we lose that connect from the real. The real and the symbolic are two of the three orders that live in tension with one another. And the third is the imaginary order. So the next thing that we look at, if you can see your slides, is that the mirror stage. Now, Lacan proposed that there is an important stage of development which was not covered by Freud, which he called the mirror stage. Now, what is this mirror stage? It is a stage that is initiated when infants look into a mirror at their own image. Most infants, if you have watched little infants, they become very fascinated with the image that they see in the mirror. So much so, up to a certain point, they almost try and interact with the image or the reflection that they see in the mirror, not realizing that it is a reflection of their own physical self. They think there is another baby there. It is only when the child realizes that what he or she sees in the mirror is a reflection of his or her personal physical form. That is what is called the mirror stage. That is the point where the child begins to identify himself or herself as the I, recognizes the me, I. So they kind of get used to seeing themselves and they know that this is me. So they develop a sense of self, the sense of an I. At this young stage, the image they see may not really correspond to their understanding of their physical self. But in some cases, the image becomes an ideal that they strive for as they develop. Now, what exactly is the psychoanalytical approach or the psychoanalytical perspective? Why are we talking about psychoanalysis at all? In the psychoanalytical perspective, the focus is on the unconscious mind rather than the conscious mind. Now, if you recall that image of the iceberg, the tip of the iceberg was your conscious mind. Below that was the subconscious, and below that, in the deeper recesses of your mind, was what was the unconscious. So basically, what psychoanalysis tries to do is it focuses on the deeper recesses of our mind in the unconscious, right? It is built on the foundational idea that our behavior is determined by experiences from our past that are lodged in the unconscious mind, in the deep recesses of our mind. Now, the focus on sex, of course, has lessened over the decades since psychoanalysis was founded. Psychology and talk therapy still place a very, very big emphasis on one's early childhood experiences. Now, what are the different types of techniques that a psychoanalyst would use? A psychoanalyst can use many different techniques, but there are four basic components that comprise modern psychoanalysis, and these four are interpretation, transference analysis, technical neutrality, and countertransference analysis. Now, what exactly is interpretation? Interpretation is the verbal communication, the dialogue that takes place between the psychoanalyst and the subject or the patient or the client, in which the analyst discusses their hypotheses of their client's unconscious conflicts. Now, usually what a psychoanalyst will try to do is help clients see the defensive mechanisms they are using and the context of the defensive mechanisms or the impulsive relationship against which the mechanism was developed. And finally, the client's motivation for this kind of a mechanism. So, for example, if I sit in a very rigid manner, right, I may not realize it. but it is because I may be uncomfortable or I have a feeling that I need to be sitting in such a position. So the psychoanalyst would be reviewing my body language, would be reviewing my posture, and would draw conclusions as to why I am sitting in such a manner. And the most likely conclusion that he or she will come to is that I'm being defensive about something that I don't want to reveal. Now, there are three types of interpretation. One is clarification, the second is confrontation, and the third is interpretation itself. So, clarification is one in which the analyst attempts to clarify what is going on in the patient's consciousness, what is the patient feeling. Confrontation is the part where you bring non-verbal clues, non-verbal aspects of the patient's behavior into a state. You bring it to the attention of the patient so he or she is aware of the kind of non-verbal clues that he or she is giving out. And interpretation refers to the analyst's proposed hypothesis of the unconscious, meaning that relates all the different aspects of the client's communication with one another. Now, what is transference analysis? Now, transference is the term for the unconscious repetition in the here and now of conflicts from the client's past. Transference analysis refers to the systematic analysis of the transference implication of the patient's total verbal and non-verbal manifestations in the hours, as well as the patient's direct and implicit communicative efforts to influence the analyst in a certain direction. And that is a quote from Kernberg. Now, this analysis of the patient's transference is a very, very essential component of psychoanalysis and is the main driver that can change the course of the treatment. Now, you realize that a person goes to a psychoanalyst because of a particular problem that he or she faces. So when psychoanalysts do the transference, that is when they can come to a conclusive state whereby they influence the direction in which the treatment should pan out. Now, in transference analysis, the analyst takes notes of all types of communication, right? Which means both verbal communication, where we use our words, we use sentences, we get into a dialogue, and non-verbal clues, which would be your body language. And the client engages in and puts together a theory on what was the cause that led to the defensive mechanisms he or she displays. Now, that theory, it forms the basis of any attempts to be made to change the behavior or the character of the person who has come to look for therapy. Then you have a term called technical neutrality. Now, what exactly is technical neutrality? The commitment of the analyst to remain neutral at all costs, to avoid taking sides in the client's internal conflicts. Right? That is technical neutrality. The analyst strives to remain at an equal distance from the client's id, his or her ego and superego, and from the client's external reality. So you stay away. You create a kind of distancing between what the client is feeling, all the internal conflicts and the turmoil that is going on, and what your own position would be, which basically means you would also not judge. You are not in a position to judge. You are not supposed to judge. So in a sense, you could say you have to almost maintain a state of indifference or disinterest in the client, which is actually not the goal, but that serves a purpose because as an analyst, it is your task to serve as a mirror for the client, for the patient, for the subject, and reflect the client's own characteristics, assumptions, and behaviors back to them so that it helps, it aids them in an understanding of themselves. Then you have counter-transference analysis, which is basically the analyst's reaction to clients and the material they present during counseling or psychotherapy sessions. Now, excuse me. According to Kernberg, contemporary view of counter-transference is that of a complex formation co-determined by the analyst's reaction to the patient's transference, to the reality of the patient's life, to the reality of the analyst's life, and to specific transference dispositions activated in the analyst as a reaction to the patient and his or her material. Now, by material here you mean whatever the patient or the one who has come to seek therapy is giving out through verbal and non-verbal cues. Countertransference analysis can be generally understood as the analyst's attempt, right, to analyze their own reactions to the client, whatever form that reaction might take. To engage in psychoanalytical treatment, the analyst needs to look at the client very, very objectively and understand the transference happening in the client and in their own experience. Now, transference and other forms of resistance is what we will look at next. One of the many forms of resistance considered in psychoanalysis is transference. In psychoanalytical theory, resistance has a very, very specific meaning. It means the blocking of memories from consciousness by the client. Resistance is the client's general unwillingness to change their behavior and engage in growth through therapy. This resistance can develop because of many, many reasons. Some could be conscious, some could be unconscious, and some can even be present in those who actually want to change. But it is there, the resistance. Transference occurs when clients redirect their emotions and feelings from one person to another, often very, very unconsciously. They're not even aware of what they're doing, but it's done. And represents a resistance or a type of blockade or an obstacle that you are creating between the subject or the client and the desired state that they want to be in, or the healing state or the healed state. It frequently occurs in treatment in the form of transference onto a therapist, in which the client applies their feelings and expectations towards another person or onto the therapist. Now, there are different types of transference. You have the paternal transference. In this type, the client or the subject looks to another person as a father figure, as the idealized father figure. So somebody who is very wise, somebody who is authoritative, somebody who is very powerful could become the substitute father figure or the ideal father figure, and you transfer your emotions, your feelings to that person. The second one is a maternal transference. Now, maternal obviously means the mother. So the client looks to another person as a mother or an idealized mother figure. So somebody who is very comforting, somebody who is very loving, somebody who is very, very nurturing. Then you have sibling transference. Now, sibling means your brothers and sisters. So this type of a thing might occur when parental relationships break down or are missing or are lacking. Instead of treating another person as a parent in a leader or follower type relationship, the client transfers a more peer-based relationship onto the other person. So you're projecting feelings of a sibling, somebody who's your age group, onto another person. Then you have non-familial transference, which means there is a transference, but it is not happening within the family circle. Now, this is a more general type of transference in which the client treats others as idealized versions of what the client expects them to be, rather than what they truly are. So it is a case of idolizing somebody. You place somebody so high on the pedestal because you think that this is what this person should be. The person may or may not fit into that image, may or may not be like that. But for you, that is the ideal thing that the person represents. So that is a case of non-familial transference. And this kind of a transference often leads to the formation of various types of stereotypes. Now, transference by itself is not harmful, but it could be a form of client resistance to treatment. If the client is projecting inappropriate or unrealistic expectations onto the therapist, he or she may not be entirely open to the change that treatment can provoke. Now, coming back, I'd like to talk a little bit more about what was happening in the 1900s to the 1940s as far as Freud was concerned and as far as the development of psychoanalysis was concerned. In 1905, Freud published 3 essays on the theory of sexuality, in which he laid out his discovery of the psychosexual phases. So he had the oral stage, which was between the ages of 0 to 2 years. That means from the time you're born till you're 2 years old. The anal phase, where the child was between 2 to 4 years. The phallic oedipal or first genital phase, where the child is between 3 to 6 years of age. Then the latency, which is from 6 years to puberty, and the mature genital stage or from puberty onwards, right? Now, his early formation included the idea that because of various kinds of societal restrictions, there is a way that society makes a person conform. Certain things that are acceptable to society and certain things that are not acceptable to society. So because of these societal restrictions, sexual wishes were very often repressed into an unconscious state. And the energy of these unconscious wishes and desires could translate into anxiety or physical symptoms. Now, this is Freud's hypothesis. Therefore, the early treatment techniques for this were hypnotism and abreaction, and they were designed to make the unconscious aware or conscious in order to relieve the pressure and the apparently resulting symptoms. Now, this method would later on be left aside by Freud, and then he would move on to looking at things in another direction. In 1915, in his work on narcissism, Freud turned his attention to this whole idea of narcissism, of being narcissistic. So Freud characterized the difference between energy directed at the self vis-a-vis energy directed at others, and called that cathexis. By 1917, in Mourning and Melancholia, he suggested that certain depressions were caused by turning guilt-ridden anger on the self. Now, why do some people suffer from depression? Because you are guilty of something and you don't know how to manage that guilt or how to come to terms with yourself. So that is internalized and results in some form of depression. In 1919, in a work called A Child is Being Beaten, he began to address the problems of self-destructive behavior or moral masochism and frank sexual masochism. Now, based on his experience with depressed and self-destructive patients who self-harm, and pondering over the carnage of World War I, by this time World War I was going on, Freud became very, very dissatisfied with considering only oral and sexual motivations for behavior. So by 1920, he addressed the power of identification with the leader and with other members in groups as a motivation in behavior. So this is in group psychology and the analysis of the ego. In that same year, 1920, Freud suggested his dual drive theory of sexuality and aggression in Beyond the Pleasure Principle. That is his work. And in that, he was trying to begin to explain human destructiveness. It was also the very first appearance of his structural theory, which consisted of the 3 new concepts of id, ego, and superego, which we talked about earlier. Now, 3 years later, in 1923, he summarized the ideas of the id, ego, and superego in the book called The Ego and the Id. In this book, he revised his whole theory of mental functioning and now began to consider that repression was only one of the many defense mechanisms that a person would indulge in, and that it happened because they were trying to reduce anxiety. So Freud characterized repression as both a cause as well as a result of anxiety. In 1926, in Inhibition, Symptoms and Anxiety, Freud characterized how intra-psychic conflict among drive and superego, which is basically we translate into wishes and guilt, could cause anxiety. and how that anxiety could lead to an inhibition of mental functions such as intellect and speech. So, both your intellect and your speech can be affected. Inhibition, symptoms, and anxiety was written in response to Otto Rank in 1924, and Otto Rank had published The Trauma of Birth, a work called The Trauma of Birth, in which he analyzed how art, myth, religion, philosophy, and therapy were illuminated by separation anxiety in the phase before the development of the Oedipus complex. Now, Freud's theories, however, characterize no such phases. According to Freud, the Oedipus complex is at the very center of neurosis and was the foundational source of all art, myth, religion, philosophy, therapy, indeed of all human culture and civilization. Now, this was the first time that anyone in the inner circle had characterized something other than the Oedipus complex as contributing to intrapsychic development, a notion that Freud rejected, as did his followers at that point of time. By 1936, the principle of multiple function was clarified by Robert Weidler, another critic. He widened the formulation that psychological symptoms were caused by and relieved conflict simultaneously. In the 1940s, Hitler was growing, the World War II had started. So Freud, obviously being a Jew, his family and many of his colleagues fled to London. And within a year, of course, Freud passed away. In the United States, following Freud's death, a new group of psychoanalysts began to explore the functions of the ego. So you had Heinz Hartmann, understandings, they built upon understandings of the synthetic function of the ego as a mediator in psychic functioning, distinguishing such from autonomous ego functions. And then you had these were known as the ego psychologists of the 1950s, and they paved the way for analytical work to focus by attending to the defenses mediated by the ego before exploring the deeper roots to the unconscious conflicts. And from then on to today, there has been interest in psychology, in psychoanalysis, whether it is in the field of psychology, whether it is in the field of child psychoanalysis. In the first decades of the 21st century, there are approximately 35 training institutes for psychoanalysis in the United States itself. And there are over 3,000 graduated psychoanalysts practicing in the States. And psychoanalysis as a field is very, very crucial, very, very important even today. And with this, we wind up what we were discussing today. We began by talking about what psychoanalysis is. We looked a little at Freud's life. We talked about Freud's theories, his work, his contribution, his different concepts. And we also looked at the followers of Freud and what they contributed to psychoanalysis and where psychoanalysis as a technique stands today. Thank you.
Are you a fresh graduate? Do you want to fulfill your educational aspiration by pursuing higher education in various interdisciplinary and multidisciplinary areas like environmental science, environment and occupational health, philosophy, sustainability science, folklore and culture studies? If yes, the School of Interdisciplinary and Transdisciplinary Studies offers various programs like Master's Program, Graduate Program, Postgraduate Diploma, Certificate and Appreciation Program. The school offers 5 Master's Programs. Master of Science, Environmental Science. The eligibility criteria for MSc Environmental Science is Graduate in Science, BTech, BE, Agriculture Graduate, forestry graduate and veterinary graduate. School also offers Masters in Environment and Occupational Health, Masters in Sustainability Science, Masters in Philosophy and Masters in Folklore and Culture Studies. The eligibility criteria for these 4 Masters program is graduate in any discipline. The school also offers various socially relevant and need-based PG Diploma program like PG Diploma in Sustainability Science, PG Diploma in Environment and Occupational Health, PG Diploma in Folklore and Culture Studies and PG Diploma in Migration and Diaspora Studies. The school also offers PG Certificate in Climate Change and Avshist Prabandhan mein Praman Patra. The school also offers 2 doctoral programs, PhD in Environmental Science and PhD in Interdisciplinary and Transdisciplinary Studies. The school offers various innovative technologies and multimedia for providing a very excellent student support system. The study material is of high quality. The learner support is provided through Gyan Darshan, Gyan Vani, IRC, Swayam Prabha and Swayam channel of IGNOU. For more detail, please log in to IGNOU website. For online admission in these programs, visit school site and also the Samarth online education portal of IGNOU. So please join these programs and fulfill your educational aspiration.
Hello and welcome to this program. Today we will discuss on landslides, and the course code for this session will be MEV002 for the postgraduate diploma and the MA in environmental and occupational health. So landslides are very common, and we have seen during the hilly regions, near the hilly regions or the slopes, the prevalence of the landslides are quite common. And in India alone, in the year 2022, 10 of the states reported 182 landslides or so, and fatalities were reported, and this is according to the Ministry of Home Affairs National Emergency Response Center. So in this session we will see about the landslide, the causes and how these landslides are caused, and also some of the prevention and the mitigation measures that can be taken in order to avoid and prevent such kind of landslides. So they are a major hydrogeological hazards that can affect large parts of India. For example, in the Vindhyas, in the Eastern Ghats, in the Western Ghats, also the Nilgiris, and in the northeastern hill ranges. So in this photograph also, if you see, some of the slopy regions, they have been affected where the soil is eroded and there is a movement, there is a mass movement is being noticed. According to the Geological Survey of India, about 12% or 12.6% of India's total land area, excluding the snow covered regions, is actually susceptible to the landslide hazards. So in this photograph also you can see the hairpin bend like structure whenever we travel to the hill stations, and here you can see that there has been some landslide activity. This could have been caused due to an earthquake or due to flood. We will see what are the factors that are responsible for causing such landslides in the world, and globally this is actually a very important hazardous event that is occurring. So largely the landslides, they have been triggered by the earthquakes or by floods or by heavy rainfall, but human activities are also known to cause the landslide. For example, the construction of roads. So these days if you see, there are the low cost roads are being constructed, and there are poor engineering structures that are being noticed in many parts of the hilly terrains. So that can again lead to the slope instability, then it can loosen the soil and the vegetation over there. Soil erosion can come around, so deforestation activities, mining, blasting, so many other problems that can actually loosen and make the slope unstable, and then the hills will be more susceptible to such kind of the landslide problems. Let us just see some case studies. Now when you look at this photograph, what comes to your mind? The scenic beauty is so beautiful, it's breathtaking. So the tea plantations which are characterizing the Darjeeling hills. So here there is rolling topography, moderate temperatures, high rainfall, and it is excellent for the cultivation of tea. But the slope stability is bad. So here again we have the rapid population, there is deforestation, and there are low cost roads with the poor engineering standards. And in 2007, when there was intense monsoon and rainfall activity in the Kalimpong region, that triggered several landslides. So the proper management, contour landscaping, and all this can help control the landslide in these regions. The second case study is that which occurred, the flash floods and the landslide in Bhagirath Valley in Uttarakhand. On 3rd of August in 2012, the upper catchment areas of Asi Ganga and Bhagirathi rivers, they received very heavy rainfall and cloudburst that was accompanied with thunderstorms and also lightning. So this again caused heavy destruction to the building, to the infrastructures and the projects that are located by the riverside. In addition, there were several pilgrims who were stranded on their way when trekking from the Gangotri to the Uttarkashi. Another case study is that which occurred in the Mandi district in Himachal Pradesh, that is the Kotrupi landslide which occurred in 2017. Himachal Pradesh is persistently jolted by the landslide. They are the second most recurring hazards in the state, and unprecedented rainfall events, the seismic activities, deforestation, mining and blasting activities, encroachment on the hill slopes, the chaotic constructions, all this position the state in a high risk zone for the landslide. In August 2017, a massive landslide, this occurred near the village of Kotrupi on the National Highway 154, the road between Mandi and Pathankot in the Mandi district of the Himachal Pradesh, that was again affected by these landslides. So we have an expert with us today, Professor R. Bhaskar from the School of Sciences, the discipline of geology. And Professor Bhaskar, we would like you to explain what are landslides, how do we define landslides, and what are the causes for the landslides, like how are they formed in nature?
You have given very good examples. In simple way, if I have to tell, landslide is nothing but sliding of the land. In other words, the regolith or the unweathered, the weathered rock, it moves from the top to the bottom essentially due to gravity. Here you have to understand that this process is not because of any geological agent like water, glaciers, wind, etc. It is essentially controlled by gravity. As the examples you are given to the students, you are given the case examples, interesting studies. All these are hilly regions, and the hilly regions or coastal regions or where there is slope instability, that is where landslides can result. Now landslides, if you ask how they can fall from one height to another, that is due to the toppling, it can be sliding, it can be flowing, and it can also be due to spreading. So these are the process in which it can take place. Either it can be a combination of this also. There are several reasons why landslides can occur. Here it is important for us to understand that unlike earthquake, we cannot prevent the loss of life nor prevent it from occurring. We cannot prevent the volcanic eruption or the loss of life, but landslides, if we understand the causes, which Dr. Sushmita asked me, and we delineate the areas, there may be very good way of reducing the loss of life due to landslides. Now, if you see what are the natural causes, why should a landslide? Basically, it is unstable. That instability, there are natural causes and there are human causes. If you see the natural causes, what are those? If there is loss of vegetative structure, that can cause the particles to move out. Second one can be that the pressure of the groundwater can destabilize the slope. Again, if you go to coastal regions, the bottom of those rocks may be eroded by the waves, the top may become unstable, and that may result in landslide. Again, weakening of slopes can occur if the snow melts and it mixes with the mud or the soil, and it makes it heavy and it flows. Again, as Dr. Sushmita mentioned in her story, that there can be earthquakes which can occur, which can cause tremors, and those areas which are already unstable, they just require a slight push. Or if a volcanic eruption has occurred anywhere, tremors will be created and those waves can push. So ultimately, it is the instability of the slope. These are the natural causes. Are there some human-made causes? Of course, humans are also responsible. If you see the human-made causes, you can see vibrations from machinery or traffic, because that can cause the rocks to, if they are unstable, to fall. There can be blasting or mining activity. That is why in hilly terrains, when you travel, they always tell you if a blasting or mining activity is going on, to stop a few kilometers away, because the waves may travel and the effect may be seen elsewhere. So they ask you to stop for a few kilometers depending on the type of detonation that is done. Similarly, if you construct the roads in a hilly terrain or change the shape of the slope, again they can also result in the kind of landslides. So landslides can be a combination of both natural as well as human causes. Either it can be entirely natural or it can be aggravated due to human activities. Now, why this occurs? Basically, it is failure of the slope. Now, what is failure of the slope? That means it is the amount of material that moves down because of slope instability. This movement can occur quite fast or it can occur quite slow. Now, it can be very rapid or it can be extremely slow that you do not see it for a long time. For example, houses in hilly terrain may develop cracks, and you can see this occurring slowly because the landslide is occurring, so the windows can get jammed or the doors, all this because the horizontal base has been slightly shifted. So it can be very fast or it can be very slow. Normally very slow can be predicted and you can prevent loss of life. The faster ones are the more riskier ones. Why does this lead to failures? One is tectonic activities. If you see the Himalayas, what happens in Himalayas? It's a tectonically active region. So there can be more landslides because the plate movement are there. Suppose you go to the karst terrains, for example, where there are limestones, you can have dissolution of limestones and again you can have the landslides occurring. So you have in the coastal areas also you can have this thing. So these are the factors which result. Now if you see the next diagram which I am showing to you, there is a slope angle and this slope angle is very critical. If this slope becomes steep, that means there will be landslides, and this can be changed either by natural conditions or by human activities. There are different type of mass movements. If you see this table, depending on the size of the grain involved, whether it is a rock, whether it is a coarse grained soil or fine grained soil, you can have different type of movements. A rock can topple down, it can slide down. If it is mixed, it can be lateral spread. It can flow if it is having more water in that. Then there can be complex movement having a combination of this. If it is only rocks, then this fall is called as rock fall. And if it is only toppling, this is called rock toppling. If it is debris, debris fall or debris slide, then you can have earth slide, all those things, then rock spread, flows, etc. These are terms depending on the size of the particles and also on the nature of the movement, whether it is sliding or it is toppling or it is flowing or it's having a complex movement. Now if you see the next diagram, there is a rock fall which I have shown in this. What is this rock fall? Is basically this is a landslide in which the rock particles fall through air and reach the bottom. Earthquake also can trigger these kind of rock falls. Now flows means there will be liquid in that, it will flow. Rock fall means directly from the top to bottom, and in the bottom what you have is called the talus. This collection is called the talus. Now if you see the next slide, you can see the rock and debris slide which are there. Slides are nothing but it is a slanting area, and there is a area in which the rocks, because of less friction, can slide. They can occur on the flat or curved surfaces, and these are normally flat surfaces, and these are weak planes along which these can occur. So if you do the structural geology study of an area, you can identify the slope angle, you can identify the kind of rock, whether there are weak planes and at what angle they are. So you can reasonably estimate what are the risks involved in that particular area. Then there is another kind of movement, if you can see, which is called creep and slump. If you see the next diagram, you can see creep is the slow movement of soil and regolith, and slump means when it is mixed with water added in the base. So these are the things. Now what are the factors which affect the mass movement? Basically, you have to understand there are two kinds of forces. One is the driving force, another is the resisting force. If the driving force becomes stronger than the resisting force, then the movement will occur. If the resisting force is more, the movement will not occur. So these are the two factors, driving force and resisting force. Now what will control this will depend on number of factors. Let us see that. Now factors which control this, if you see, driving forces, if you see, the gravity is a very important phenomena. It is a driving force. Naturally, anything which is unstable due to gravity will come down. Second important driving force is the rock structure. Rocks are not solid. They are having some cracks, they are having some faults, and they are having some planes, and these also may result in movement. For example, water can enter in these gaps and act as a lubricant, and they can move. The third important is water. Water also, if it mixes with soil, it can make it heavy and it can come down. So water also causes these things, but water has a complex role. To just give you an example, if you go to a beach and you take the sand and you take little water, very little water, so that the sand particles experience cohesion, attraction, you can make some structure out of it, some small structure you can make. But if you pour more water, the same structure will get destroyed. So water has both roles as a driving force and resisting force. It depends on the quantity of water. So these are the factors which do the landslide occurrence.
So now, Professor Bhaskar, you explained the definition and what are landslides and the causes for the landslide formation. So are there any precursor events, like how do we know that if a landslide is going to occur? Like for example, in earthquakes, we know that there are some conditions. and also what are the mitigation and also the prevention or the mitigation methods that can be followed or adopted in order to prevent the mass movements occurring in nature.
You asked a very good question, Dr. Sushmita. Any hazard gives some precursor signals. Just like our health, when it gets bad, our kidney stops giving, our urine results are wrong, or your blood values are wrong, and all these are signals that some part is not working. Similarly, in natural hazards, every hazard gives some signal. So it is up to the geologist to see the signals and alert those concerned agencies that there is a possibility. Now, what are these? If you see where landslides occur, the doors are going to occur. If the sliding is taking place, doors or windows will stick together. For example, in the walls, new cracks can appear. Then in the ground, widening of cracks can take place. Sometimes you will see that utility lines, public utility lines, can crack and leakage can occur. Then again, sometimes suddenly there can be springs or saturated water, groundwater coming out. Then there can be new bulges in the ground if there is some kind of activity below the surface. Then poles, if you see the electric poles, fences, they start leaning. All these are signals that something is going to occur. Now you asked a question, how to prevent it. Now once you know, you've seen the problem that there is a possibility of landslide, then the fundamental thing to be addressed is that slope stability has to be handled. As I said earlier, there is driving force and resisting force that depends on the slope angle. So basically you will do everything to keep the slope angle intact. Second, I said to you, water can play an important role. So you will do those things so that water is removed or is not allowed to stay and push the rocks. Now what are those things? If you see the slide, you can see there are several technological methods which are there, and the first one, what you can see, is directing the surface water away from the landslide. You have to direct the water. It should not flow. Either you can put the perforating drains and take it out, or you could drain the ground by some method. So this is one way we can do. There are a number of mitigation technologies which are used, which are simple and which are cost effective. They are not very costly. And if you see the mitigation measures, the first one is slope reduction. Artificially you can add material to the area where slope is sharp and reduce the slope. Second, you can have concrete coatings. Sometimes in hilly terrains you must have seen concrete coatings put. And why they are put? Because they have to stop the movement of these loose particles. Then sometimes retaining walls are also built. These walls, what they do, if the rocks from the above come and hit, they come and block those rocks and do not allow the rocks to fall on the road where traffic or people may be there. Then they also use rock bolts, where they use technology to fix the weak areas, just like you use a screw and do it. Broken areas, you do this. Then you can use cable, nets and wires. This is wide ranging, so that just like a net in a football, these kind of small nets will catch the rocks which are falling. The next step which is done is interceptor ditches. Now what you can do, if water is flowing, you can make a small depression on the way, so that the water enters those depressions or is diverted away and is not allowed to move along the same area. So these kind of technological interventions can be done using for the landslides, and this has been proven to be effective. And there are countries, for example, where Hong Kong or Norway, where they are almost reduced the death due to landslides almost to nil because of very good practices. In India, Geological Survey of India is the nodal agency for the landslides, and National Institute of Disaster Management has also done a lot of work, and there are maps available which are the vulnerable areas, what is the slope stability, etc.
So now that we know that even these like precursor events and the mitigation methods are also available, what comes to my mind is there any relation between climate change and the landslides?
You asked a very wonderful question. Because we underestimate the role of climate impacts on landslides. What
Because
are
these days, if you see, especially in India, if we see 2022 itself, there have been so many of these flash floods and the cloud bursts,
Exactly.
in the Himalayan regions, and we are having so many of the landslides.
Yeah, exactly. What happens? What is climate change doing? It is changing the frequency and intensity of the rainfall and the duration. So, what happens if we do not know the areas which are going to be affected by climate change? Those areas, if they are having already weak slopes or unstable, by this sudden downpour, as you rightly mentioned, there can be GLOF situation, glacial lake outburst, which can be there. There can be cloud burst, and all these unusual climate phenomena which is occurring can cause lot of loss of human life. Climate studies are very important from a variety of angles, even they are related to landslides. It is very important for us to identify those areas which are unstable and those areas which are going to have extreme rainfall, predicted rainfall, and try to map them so that we can alert those region for these kind of events.
So then, is there any other method, any other analytical method that we can also follow?
Yes, nowadays with the application of technology, lot of solutions are available, and if you see the big data analytics are used, then artificial intelligence is used, and you can identify based on earlier location of landslides. You can use the applied mathematical models using big data, and you can solve them. It is very important for us that we integrate social sciences into this understanding of landslides, because ultimately integration of social science with disaster risk reduction is very important. People have to be sensitized. The stakeholders have to be told what is to be done, and what traditional knowledge, if we have something, that has to be applied. Sometimes simple warnings can save lot of life. It doesn't take much technology. There has been research which has proved that if the people are alert and they are made aware, the loss of life is tremendously reduced. We should have specific laws protecting these kind of landslide prone areas. Of course, we have to be careful while doing construction in hilly terrains. There are certain building guidelines and procedures to be followed. Ultimately, all stakeholders have to be involved. Teachers and educators have a great role. Programs like this, what IGNOU is doing, has a great role, because we are ultimately creating awareness among the public, making them discuss and debate an issue, and get alerted with those kind of things. Like today, climate change, even a child knows, because this is the kind of debate which has come in the public domain. So natural disasters, if we take care, if we take proper steps, to a large extent we can reduce the loss of human life. Certain disasters we cannot stop it from occurring, but of course if we are alert and we take the necessary steps, then we can reduce the loss of life. Thank you.
So I think October 13th was the day for the International Day for the Prevention of the Natural Hazards and Disasters. So thank you for this lecture on landslides. And my dear learners and viewers of this course, I hope you have had a good understanding of the landslide, the causes of the landslides, with the help of some case studies, and how we can have some mitigation methods, the precursor events that can be understood, and also finally why landslide education and awareness is also very important for the education of all. Thank you for your patient listening.
We wear clothes on a daily basis. But have we ever wondered, where do our clothes come from? Who makes our clothing? And who are the people and the process responsible for the whole manufacturing of our clothing? If you want to know more about this, Indira Gandhi National Open University from the School of Continuing Education has launched a program which is Certificate in Apparel Merchandising. There are many benefits after doing this program. You can become a designer in various fields. It can be fashion designer, apparel designer, costume designer, or even a textile designer. One can also work as a fashion consultant. Research and development is another field which one can take up after doing this certificate course. Going into academics is another perk after doing this program. Getting into fashion houses or fashion studios as an intern is also a very good option post doing the certificate in apparel merchandising. The basic eligibility of the program is 10+2. The duration of the program is 6 months to 2 years. The program is also available for both the admission cycles, which is July and January. The exams are conducted twice a year, in June and December. So what are you waiting for? Join this program and get an enriching knowledge in the field of apparel merchandising. And to do so, you can log on to the official website of the university, www.ignou.ac.in.
Hello, and a very warm welcome to today's session, which is on posology. I am Dr. Rachna Agarwal, Assistant Professor in the School of Vocational Education and Training and Coordinator for the program PG Diploma in Pharmaceutical Sales Management. So I welcome all my students and the other viewers of Gyan Darshan channel. Let us begin with today's session, which is on posology. Today's objectives would be, first we'll try to see what is posology. Let us try to first understand this term itself and what it deals with. Then we are going to understand and we are going to learn how we can calculate the dosage for a small child, for an infant who is less than 1 years old, and for an adult. So we today in today's sessions, we are going to first of all see and understand what is posology, calculate the dosage of infants, children and adults, and we are going to see how the dosage forms are classified into different categories. Also, we will understand and we will try to describe the role of types of additives which are added in the drugs or any medicines, and we will also today discuss some commonly used dosage forms. So, let us begin. What is posology? Posology is, by definition, it is a branch of pharmacology which deals with the determination of the dosage or the quantity of drug which is to be administered to any individual for any benefit or for any therapeutic purpose. And the science, the method by which we calculate this dosage is known as posology, which is nothing but a branch of pharmacology. Dose of a drug is the amount of medical preparation or of any radiation also which is administered at one point of time to an individual. That we all know because we always, whenever we go to a doctor, he prescribes some dosage, and the dosage along with the manner in which that dose is to be taken, whether it is to be taken morning, afternoon, evening, or it is to be taken twice a day. So, the entire prescription of any doctor is based on the drug, the medicine, and the dosages, how they have to be taken, in how much quantity and in how frequently they have to be taken. So, all this is dealt in pharmacology. Then we know now that dose or any drug is any drug, and dosage is the determination of amount and the frequency and the number of doses of a medicine which is to be given to a particular patient. So, this is clear what is dose and what is a dosage. Dosage is the frequency and dose is the amount or the quantity which we of any medicine or any radiation also which is prescribed to any patient or any person for therapeutic purposes. Now, how we can learn to calculate this dosage by ourselves. Like, for example, you can see here, there are various formulas for calculation of the dosage for infants and children separately. Infants, because infant age we take usually less than 1 year, but for the purpose of calculation here we are taking children who are less than 2 years, and children who are in the age group from 2 to 12 years. How we can calculate a child dose, that all we are going to see. So, these are some of the rules you can see here. First is the Young's rule, in which any child between the age of 2 to 12 years can his or her dosage can be calculated with the formula which is given here, that is age in years divided by age in years plus 12 into the adult dose. This is first rule given by Young. Second is Clark's rule for children who are below 2 years of age, which we say who are infants. To calculate the dose of a drug for an infant or for a child who is less than 2 years old, we can use this formula in which we will calculate with the help of his weight. Weight in pounds divided by 150 into adult dose. So, here, for example, I have taken one example. If we have to calculate the dose for a child who is 5 years old, and when we know that the adult dose of that particular drug is 100 milligrams. In that case, now since the child is 5 years old, we can calculate his dosage by this formula, that is first formula, Young's formula, age in years divided by age in years plus 12 into the adult dose. So, age is 5 years divided by 5 plus 12 into 100 mg. This gives you approximately 29.41 and the approximate dosage would be 30 milligrams. So here, once like for example, we sometimes are at home and we have small children, and we know for ourselves that we as a adult, we are prescribed by the doctor that we have to take 500 mg of this particular medicine. But if there is a small child at home, then we sometimes do not understand how we can give that, in what proportion, in what quantity should we give that particular dose to our small child. So here, in using this formula, you can also learn and calculate that in case you have been prescribed some medicine with a particular dose and you have a child who is of this particular age or any age which lies between 2 to 12 years, you can calculate the dose for that child through this formula. Okay, this is clear. Next, there is another rule given by Fred's. Fred's rule is for infants up to 2 years, as I said, and here the formula is for very small child, that the infant dose, that is for a child who is less than 2 years of age, this particular infant dose can be calculated with the help of this formula, that is age in months. How old is the child in months? Now we have to take out, divided by 150 into the adult dose. We have to know the adult dose. For example, if we have to calculate the dose of a drug for a 1.5-year-old infant, then infant dose would be 12 months plus 6 months, because it is 1.5 year, we will convert it into months. 12 months plus 6 months divided by 150 into 100, because 100 mg was the adult dose. Here we get this, and now for a 1.5-year-old infant, our dose is 12 milligrams. So now we know that if as an adult we are taking 100 mg, so our small infant who is 1.5-year-old, he or she can be given a dose which is equivalent to 12 mg, and that we can calculate with the help of this formula. So these are some of the formulas. There are some more formulas you can see on the screen. Next is the Dilling's formula, in which a child dose is calculated with this formula, that is age in years plus 3 divided by 30 into adult dose. This is one of another formulas for calculating the dose of any child from the age of 5 or 2 to maybe 12 or a little more years. Then another formula is by calculating the dose of a child by the square meter surface area method. That is, when there is a child whose body surface area of a child is known, then we can divide that body surface area of the child by the body surface area of the adult and multiply it with the adult dose. This is slightly difficult, but this is also one of the methods. Now, if suppose we have to calculate the dose of an adult, there is another formula which you can use. The formula for calculating the dose for an adult is that the drug doses, which are often given in mg per kg body weight for an individual, it may be calculated with the help of a formula like individual dose. Now here we have to first know the dose of the medicament itself. That is, sometimes we know that per kg, for a 1 kg, we know that these many milligrams has to be given to any individual. So if the individual is of say 50 kgs, so the individual dose would be 50, that is the individual's weight, body weight, multiplied by the medicament which is prescribed in milligrams per kg body weight. For example, you can see this example which is given here. If the prescribed dosage is 10 milligrams per kg, this is the dose of any chemical compound, drug, medicament, whatever you call, then, and if the body weight of a person is 50 kgs, for whom we are calculating the dose, then the individual dose will be 10 milligrams per kg into 50 kgs, which is the actual body weight, which is equivalent to 500 milligrams. So we know that for any particular drug or medicament, the prescribed dose was 10 milligrams per kg body weight, and by multiplying with the body weight of the person, we can calculate the exact dose which that particular individual should be given. So this was about some of the calculations by which we can calculate the dosages of any individual, any child or any infant. Now let us see further in this branch of pharmacology, posology. There are various kinds of dosage forms. Now let us see what are the various kinds of dosage forms. As we know that dosage forms or any kind of medicine which we call may be classified into different in the following ways. Firstly, depending upon the physical form of the product or the drug itself or the medicament itself, and secondly on the basis of route of administration, whether we are giving the medicine orally or whether the medicament is being sprayed or whether the medicine is being applied topically. So depending upon either the route of administration or depending upon the form of the dosage itself. Form means whether it is solid, liquid, we can divide the dosage forms into two categories. Now you see here on the first basis, that is on the very forms, we have solid, semi-solid and liquid dosage forms, and on the basis of different routes of administration, we have orally administered dosage forms, parenterals, rectal route, topical, lungs, nasal, eye and ear. Orally administered dosage forms are the ones which we can swallow, which we can eat or we can have by our mouth. They may be solutions, they may be suspensions, they may be syrups, gels, emulsions, powders, granules, capsules or tablets. Parenterals, on the other hand, are the ones which are injected in our body. They cannot be eaten, they cannot be swallowed, and parenterals is a scientific term, but in layman we can say injections. Injections may be in solution, suspension or emulsion form, even implants for that matter, and other irrigation and dialysis solutions also come under this category because they are all injected into the body. Then the different routes of administration, as we have listed here, are the rectal route. Like for example, you must have heard in some patients the enema is given, and under this category we have suppositories, we have creams, ointments, powders and various kinds of solutions. Topical is as I said, which is applied on the top of your skin or any mucosa or a mucous membrane. They are all topical medicines. Like for example, various ointments, throat pains, creams, pastes, lotions, gels or even some aerosols which we spray on our body. Like we have some pain relief sprays. You must have seen some sports persons who are given immediate relief by spraying of some painkiller aerosols in the form of sprays. Then we have another route of administration is through directly into the lungs. This we know many asthmatic patients are using, which is another means by which you are spraying the medicament directly into your lungs, as we commonly call them inhalers. They are nothing but pressurized aerosols which directly reach your lungs to give you the benefit in the localized manner. Then we have certain nasal sprays also. But this is another means of giving a medicine through your nose. That is why they are known as nasal. Maybe some inhalation solutions or sprays. And again, eye and ear, we can have certain lotions, eye drops or ointments for the eye. And for ear, we can have certain kinds of Again, eardrops, which may be solutions or suspensions or ointments. So this was about the various kinds of dosage forms which were divided into various categories on the basis of the route of administration. Now we have talked about the routes of administration and dosage forms. We all know that any medication or any drug is actually a chemical compound, which may be in any form, maybe solid, granules, powders, liquid, or in any other form, maybe a volatile oil which volatilizes when we spray it or when we crush it. But in order to deliver that particular drug or that particular medicine to in our body, we use certain kind of additives. These additives are of various types, and they are nothing but they are the you can say they are the vehicles which help in getting the medicines effectively in our body, maybe whichever route of administration we use. So let us see what are these additives, because they are also very important in delivering the medicine. Now, the action of a dosage form depends on the additives that are added. An additive is a non-drug compound. It itself is non-reactive. It does not have any properties which will harm us or benefit us, and it has a definite function to perform in the drug formulation. So what are these additives? These additives are generally used in formulations which are used are firstly vehicles, we call them vehicles. Second, disintegrating agents, form givers, various kinds of organoleptic additives that are coloring, flavoring and sweetening agents, stabilizers and manufacturing additives. Now, I will take them up one by one. What are these vehicles which are used as additives in any formulation? Vehicle is a term which we know that is can be used for any solid, liquid or semi-solid material, and it is used in the formulation for carrying the drug or chemical compound effectively in our body. So these additives, they form the bulk of the dosage form, such as, for example, solvents, maybe in the form of aqueous or non-aqueous form, and they are used to dissolve the drug. Like base, if we say, for example, is a semi-solid vehicle into which the drug substance is incorporated, and this particular base may be helping that medicine to reach our body. So if we take, for example, any formulation which is in the form of ointment, maybe a paste or a semi-solid suppository, in that we use various kinds of bases, maybe paraffin, wax, maybe any other gel, glycerine. These all other different kinds of bases in which the medicine or the chemical compound is added so that it can be easily delivered into the body. So this is one kind of a vehicle base, and the other is diluents. Diluents are also vehicles which are the materials which are added to increase the bulk or to reduce the drug concentration. If there is too much of the drug, then sometimes the body is like, if we just take the medicine itself in a pure manner, we sometimes find the taste very bitter. So we add certain bulk diluents, or we can even say we even coat the medicine in a by a sugar coated any compound, so that the bitterness is masked. Similarly, to reduce the drug concentration, we use these vehicles which may be either base or diluents. Next kind of additives is the disintegrating agent. See, any medicine which we take, which is ingested, especially a tablet, it has to disintegrate in the body into finer particles. and to basically make that drug available to the body. For example, if we take the example of tablets, so in a tablet, the disintegrating agents are added so that when we swallow the tablet, this disintegrating agent, which may be very hygroscopic in nature, so that when we just swallow the medicine with the help of water, the water, as soon as it comes in contact with the water, it will help the tablet to disintegrate. You must have seen certain tablets or certain powders which are effervescent in nature. So the moment they come in touch with the water, so they disintegrate and the fast action is obtained in the body. So in order for the drug to be assimilated by the body, to be digested and to be available in the blood, these disintegrating agents play a major role. First of all, they deliver the medicine and then they disintegrate so that the medicine is available for the stomach to absorb, for the acid to act upon it, and then it can be easily metabolized in our body. Then we have certain form givers. These are the additives which are added to give a desired physical form. Okay, they give this form. For example, a surfactant or any hydrocolloids, emulsions or suspensions, they are all emulsifying agents and suspending agents which give the form to the medicament. Then we have certain organoleptic additives, as I said, which are nothing but coloring agents, flavoring agents and sweetening agents to make the medicine more palatable. Then we have certain kind of additives which are called stabilizers, and these are the substances or additives which are added in the dosage form to give physical, chemical and microbiological stability to the product. They may be antioxidants so that they prevent the oxidation of the drug, or they may be some kind of antimicrobial preservatives which are added to prevent the growth of microorganisms in the product. For example, if it's a syrup or which has a sugar base, then maybe we can add some antimicrobial preservatives in it. Another kind of additive is manufacturing additives. These are the additives which are added to facilitate processing of the dosage form itself. They are generally required in the preparation of tablets, compressed tablets, for example lubricants or any anti-adhesives, so that they do these molecules of the drug, they do not become clumpy. They facilitate uniform flow of granules into the dye. For example, if the dye is injected into the blood, then certain additives are added so that the dye is uniformly flowing in the blood. It should not stick to the arteries or the walls of the arteries. So to facilitate the action of this particular drug, these manufacturing additives are added. So this was about the additives. Now I will just quickly list the various commonly used dosage forms, and I would encourage all my learners of PG DPSM program to please go through your third course material, which is on pharmaceutics and pharmacology. Some of the commonly used dosage forms which here I am mentioning, they are given in lot of detail in that particular study material. These are tablets, capsules. What are these different kinds of tablets? You will learn from there. Coated, uncoated, capsules, hard capsules, gelatin capsules, soft gelatin capsules. Then we have certain kinds of emulsions. What are these emulsions? Maybe they are in oil and water or water in oil type of emulsions. What is where they are used? What kind of medicines can be prepared in then emulsion forms? Then we have certain suspensions, liniments. These are the, lotions, paints. I'm just giving you a brief idea here because the entire study material is giving a lot of detail about each and every dosage form. So I would like to now finish here because there are about 24 or 25 dosage forms which I have listed here, nasal drops, sprays, inhalations, which you would really find interesting if you read this third course study material of our program, which is PG-DPSM, PG Diploma in Pharmaceutical Sales Management. This program is, we all know, is essentially for those who want to pursue their career in as a medical representative. So thank you very much, and I would like you all to join again for the next session, for the details of which we are going to email to you. Thank you.